Thanks, Lars. And on behalf of the Battle River Watershed, welcome to our watershed. You're right now sitting in a sub-basin called the Stony Creek sub-basin, which flows into the Battle River and becomes the source of water that you're drinking this morning. Enjoy the water. I like to say that without our water treatment plant, our water quality in the Battle River is third world quality because of the amount of phosphorus, nitrogen, and fecal coliforms in the water. So we do have some problems. And moved all by itself. But this is who we are. We're a non-profit society. We're organized around a 15-member board. We have currently 5 staff people, and our budget is $250,000 to $400,000 a year. Depends on how successful we are searching out funds during the year, like any other non-profit. I'm sure those in the room are familiar with the struggles we have. And we're designated by Alberta Environment as the Watershed Planning and Advisory Council for the Battle River. And that's about as far as I'm going to go in this presentation. Because Lars this morning said, can you cut it off a little sooner? And so I was going to cut it off at the title page, but when I put the mouse down here, I guess it jumped to this page, so I'll cut it off at this point. Because last night I had a great experience. I went to the Cirque du Soleil in Edmonton. I had a mind-blowing experience watching all these young performers literally doing a lot of acrobats without a net. I only saw one of the performers with a wire attached behind her back, and there's good reason, because she leapt off her thing at the end of her act and floated down. So I'm going to try and do this without a net, because after Lars came up to me, I thought, well, I'm going to see what Martin says and see if I can relate any of the academic presentation to a practical application. And while you were going through, I was circling some words that resonated with me. The tipping point. System reorganizes. Domain of behavior. That was a key one. Attractor. Hot enough fire. And then you end up with a whole different system. And while I was listening to you, I thought back to a walk that several of us took in June. And I've talked about this as one of my favorite behavior stories, and it relates to that domain of behavior. Because in the Battle River Watershed, we have no mountains. We're prairie fed. So only the precipitation in summertime and the snowfall, that's what we have to work with. So there's no mountains. But we do have something called Mount Butte, which is at our headwaters at Battle Lake, which is a small rise. If you walk from the bottom to the top, it would take you 40 minutes. So we're not talking a very big rise. But it's an area undisturbed by glaciers. So you can walk up there, and if you look straight out to the west, you can see the North Saskatchewan watershed and where it starts. And if you look off to the south, you can see where the Red Deer watershed starts. So it's kind of a unique spot. And if we look straight down, we look into the Battle River Creek, which is the headwaters for Battle Lake, which is our headwaters. And a group of people took a walk up there in early part of June. And it was led by a local fellow called Mike Black, who's very passionate about the area. And so he met us at the bottom of Mount Butte, and we started walking up. And he says, we're going to have to walk through a little wet area to start with, because it's wet out right now, and so we're going to get wet feet before we get up the mountain. And sure enough, we did. We sort of skipped to the dry spots, but we got over the wetland and started up the trail. As we started up the trail, we were having a great conversation, and we came to a crossroads. And obviously, you can see if you went to the left, it was ATV traffic. And if you went to the right, it was more gradual. And at which point Mike said, well, this is a natural preservation area. They're not supposed to have any ATVs up here, but they don't listen, and they go to the left. It's a higher steep, they have more fun, but if we walk, we go to the right. So of course we chose to go to the right. And as we walked along, we were again looking at the wildlife, looking at the foliage, and having a great conversation as we walked to the top of Mount Butte. And after having a light lunch up there, we started walking down. And as we walked down the hill, we could hear some noise approaching. And it sounded like a small gas engine. And we were close to a lake, so it could have been a boat motor. But as we got closer, you could realize it was the sound of a chainsaw. And as we walked farther down the hill, Mike Black's shoulders slumped farther and farther forward, like a man defeated. And then he said, "That's probably my neighbor." And sure enough, it was. His neighbor was down on this wetland that we had crossed, and he had decided that he was going to make it better for the ATVs. And he had his chainsaw out, and he had his lumber that he brought in, and he was cutting his lumber up, and he was making a bridge across the wetland. And so and it wasn't just for people to walk over, it was for their ATVs to get over and go up the hill. Because not only was he there, he was of grandfather age, his son was there, and his two grandchildren were there as well. Each one of them with an ATV, and the grandchildren's was the worst stuck in the mud. And it was a disappointing scene for us, because they were in an area where they weren't supposed to be. There had been a sign as we go up the hill, no ATVs, but obviously they chose a different path. And he became the attractor for me in this story, because he represented a domain of behavior that I would sort of like to shift in our watershed. In my PowerPoint presentation, I had a picture that Natalie and I were driving down the main street, Camrose, one day, and it's a big Dodge 4x4 truck. It's got two stacks coming out the back, and on the back window it says hybrid repellent. And that's the attitude that we're dealing with in some of our people out here. The domain of behavior, the attractors. And then I thought of your line, the hot and the fire. Because the people we were up on this walk with were not just people from the Watershed Alliance. These were some of our partners. And they became the hot fire, because they said, this is wrong. This is definitely wrong. What can we do about it? And the part of our behavior is, none of us went up to that grandfather and talked to him and said, do you know what you're doing? We acted like we were defeated, or in the definition of resilience that I looked like we were bent or compressed, and just taken out of the equation, because he represented what was right in his opinion. And I would like to see us someday go back to this same, well, we actually are going back in September, but I'd love for someday to see this grandfather walk up Mount Butte with his grandchildren. And when he gets to the path that left, you go with your ATVs, or right, you go and walk and see the mother grouse with her babies, that he takes the path to the right and walks up Mount Butte with his grandchildren. That's what gives me hope. And when I see people such as this individual, I think he's working from his beliefs. And how do I change his beliefs? Or how do I let him see that there's another way of looking at things? And I used to get quite annoyed. I'm a big enough guy. I could have challenged him at the day and said, you know, what the heck are you doing? I was bigger than he was. Quite a bit bigger than he was. But that wasn't the point. Because it's not the way I'm built anymore. But when I see people that have behaviors that are quite a bit different than mine, I'm now reminded of one slide that Susanna brought to my attention, and her name was Frankie, wasn't it, out of Ontario? What's her name?
Frankie James.
Frankie James out of Ontario. And the slide in her PowerPoint was, imagine the change in social behavior you can have if you, because we as a society have trained people now, such as my bigger brother, who's bigger than I am, he's gruffer than I am, he's more redneck than I am. But you know what? When he goes for a walk with his dog, he picks up his dog shit. And if we can train someone like my brother to go out for a walk and pick up his dog shit, we've got hope. We've got hope. So when I see these individuals now that drive the hybrid repellent or that are building stuff in wetlands where they shouldn't be, I smile now because I think someday you'll pick up your dog shit. And there's one picture I want to find on my PowerPoint because it speaks to resilience. I haven't seen a hand wave, so I think I'm good for time. So I'm just going to find it, and then I'll end with that. It's a picture that was sent to me by someone who Twitters. Is that what you do? Tweet. Obviously, I don't tweet. One of the recreational lakes within our watershed is Pigeon Lake. And Pigeon Lake is greatly impacted this year by several things going on, with blue-green algae and fish kills. And Mitch sent me this picture. They have this PowerPoint presentation, so I'm sure it'll be on the wherever you put it later on. Start here, because what gives us hope? What keeps us working? And this is one of the things I do in my office every day. This is the picture that Mitch sent me. I think it was out of the Edmonton Sun, and the headline was "Thousands of dead fish wash up in Alberta Beach," and it's Mamio Beach at Pigeon Lake. So, unfortunately, the resolution is not very clear. But here's a pile of dead fish. And the young boy or young girl is still playing in the water. Now there's resiliency. I've come to the lake to have fun. I don't care if there's dead fish here. I've got my sand bucket. I'm going in the water. There's hope. You're going to remember that picture. Here's that one about the dog shit. I love that. Here's another one. Here's another one that I should frame this one as well, because the story behind it is it's a young girl in Texas, and her dad says to her, just a minute till the football game is finished, and then we'll go outside. She writes him this note: never put nature aside for television. You burnt my feelings today, and I am warning you, never do what you did today again. And this little icon is it's actually a TV remote drawn by an elementary school student in our poster contest, and the title of the poster was "Drop the Remote," and that's become a theme for us. This is the child's poster, but it's when I'm outside in the Battle River watershed, I drop the remote, and that's so key that if we can get more kids to drop the remote. So that ends sort of an abridged.